Hey guys, this is Tauna. Today we're going to be talking about what you could instead of build instead of getting one of the precons for Final Fantasy. Now, obviously, the precons for Final Fantasy are really fun, right? I've got all four of them and they are incredibly enjoyable. However, they are also incredibly hard to get. Even looking at TCG Player, as I've got up on the screen right now, the MSRP for these is at $80 US. And having a look at them, there's some of them that are all the way up here at $123. All of them except for the Final Fantasy VI one are at least above that MSRP, and this one here is sitting at that MSRP. This is actually pretty crazy. We don't know when there's going to be reprints. There is a rumor that there's going to be reprints in July, which sure is great, except for keep in mind that even then they're going to be pretty hard to get, right? Like these are sold out everywhere and they will continuously be sold out for quite a bit, unfortunately. But that's not even the point. The point is that, despite them being really hard to get and everything, they aren't anything beyond a precon. Precons are great, and these are some of the best precons they've ever released, but there is still better decks that you could potentially build that are going to work better, be potentially stronger, and potentially kind of take you up to that next level for easier and potentially cheaper. Because even if you do go, say, get this precon here for the Cloud Final Fantasy VII one, you're paying 120 for that. And let's say you do $50 US worth of upgrades for that, that's 170 US just to be able to take it to, say, a bracket 3 or something. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to show you 3 custom precons that I've made for you guys to check out, potentially get. And if you guys like this series, I could potentially do more. So this series is basically going to be, don't buy these precons, instead buy these other, custom made precons. Now, before we do get into it, the first thing I want to talk about here is my Ko-fi. So this is essentially a way for you guys to be able to go donate, buy me a coffee essentially for all those mornings that I'm waking up at 5 a.m. to make you guys videos. If you want to support the channel, you can go over here and I'll put the link to that down in the description and comments alongside the links to these different precons that I'm going to show you. So the first one here we're talking about is Chocos Flock. This is built around, obviously, birds. So Choco here is going to be the commander, Choco, Seeker of Paradise, a really nice bird Bant commander. So he has whenever one or more birds you control attack. Choco doesn't even have to attack for this. Look at the top. Look at that many cards from the top of your library. You can put one of them into your hand, any number of lands from there onto the battlefield tapped, and then the rest into your graveyard. So you can tell the kind of beats that I'm going to hit with the deck here. We're going to be going after birds, obviously, a whole bunch of birds and birds landfall. So this is going to be based more around the kind of, chocobos kind of stuff. Also, we're going to have some reanimation, recursion stuff in here as well, because of the fact that we're going to be dumping a whole bunch of stuff potentially into our graveyard. We want to be able to bring that stuff back. So let's go through our artifacts here. We've got the Chocobo Racetrack to make us some more Chocobos. Biden of Thassa for some card draw. We've got Arcane Signet, Soul Ring, and Patchwork Banner for our mana rocks here. Because of the fact that we're in like a, in green, we're going to be wanting to get a whole bunch of landfalls and stuff, I didn't go with mana rocks. We've got a couple mana rocks in here with the Arcane Signet, because Arcane Signet is just, goated. Patchwork Banner because it buffs up our birds, but realistically, we could even potentially drop the Soul Ring from this to add in some more ramp instead. The Herald's Horn is in here to allow us to make our birds cheaper, as well as allow us to be able to cheat some birds from the top of our library into our hand, which is great. Into our actual creatures here, and I should sort this by the mana value instead. Sort by mana value here. Our creatures are just birds. These are all birds that specifically want kind of other birds as well in here. We do have some birds like the Saz's Chocobo here that care about landfall as well. The Goose Mother is great because of the fact that it costs X, and because we're getting a whole bunch of lands out, we can cast a huge Goose Mother with this. Stuff to protect our other birds with like Essior here. The Avian Interrupter is essentially like a counter spell for a lot of things. It's not a true counter spell, but it is going to potentially work as a counter spell because there's some things that people are not wanting to cast from their graveyard. Sorry, not from the graveyard, from like once it becomes plotted. If they're using like a counter spell, you can cast this, exile that counter spell, and then boom, now they're not going to be able to cast it because it's foretold, like it's plotted. They can only cast it as a sorcery. It's not great. Whisper of the Spheres here to give all our birds, like make our birds cheaper. Even Mind Sensor is good because it makes it so that our opponents aren't going to be able to search their libraries properly. The Jackdaw Savior is actually really great here as well because we're going to have a whole bunch of birds potentially in our graveyard. This allows us to bring them back when our other birds die. Traveling Chocobo because, you know, our birds get extra ETBs then, and whenever birds enter, we get to do extra stuff. And yeah, there's some cool stuff that we can potentially do with this, which is nice. Hermes just creates birds. Whenever we cast non-creature spells, creates birds, and then when we attack with birds, we get to scry, which works really well because we can stack that scry 2 with our Choco here, and do whichever one of them first, so we can stack the top of the deck to work better with Choco. The great thing as well about being in Bant birds is that we can use Radagast. You know, Radagast isn't a card that you'd usually use for birds because previously in the full like bird focus set, or, you know, even when they're focusing on flying, it was in Azorius colors. So he kind of got left out because he's got green. Now we can use him here. We can even cast, you know, bigger birds with him too. Castrol lets us cheat out birds or, you know, reanimate birds. Tanos as well is great because it allows us to copy our birds, which is cool, except they become artifact birds as well, which is really interesting. And I really love the Emeria Shepherd here because it allows us to return things from our graveyard to our hand whenever a landfall happens, which is potentially going to be happening a lot, as well as potentially even to the battlefield if it is a plains there. Our enchantments are to either buff up our creatures, make it so that we can't be blocked, which is huge. Beastmaster Ascension will make our birds huge as well. Murmuration gives them +1/+1 and Vigilance. So there's a bunch of bird stuff here. Spelunking is honestly one of my favorite ones of all time, and we'll see that in one of the other precons later. It makes it so all our lands enter untapped. So Choco is going to be cheating out these lands onto the battlefield that typically would be tapped, which means you're not going to be able to use them till your next turn. Why don't we just ignore that? Like, why don't we just ignore that? Just make them so they enter tapped, you know? So now we use Choco, we put out 4 lands or something like that, and then you get to use them immediately is pretty crazy. I really like the side quest raise of the Chocobo here as well, because it's going to create us a bird, and then on the other side lets us tutor up a land here with a black Chocobo. Into our instance, just removal, counter spells. I really like Strict Serenade because it gives the person a bird and you're just like, hey, you've seen how my birds are going? Well, here, have a bird yourself. Winged Portent is good here because it's just going to be 3, draw a card for each creature with flying, which is all our creatures. Flurry of Wings, just create a huge amount of bird soldiers. Perch Protection here is just a Teferi's protection, essentially, that also is going to create us some birds too. Lands are typical kind of lands for this kind of deck. And then our sorceries are a mixture of mass reanimation with the Ascend from Avernus. We've got some reanimation with the Savine's Reclamation here. Storm of Souls, again, another mass reanimation. And then we've got a couple kind of removal pieces here with Chocobo's Kick. And Distant Melody is good for like card draw. We're going to have a huge amount of card draw here, which is great. In fact, I could have probably put like a Wizards class or something in here because of the amount of card draw that we can potentially pump out with those big things there. Although realistically, Choco's not doing card draw himself, so yeah. All right, into our second one here, we got Genomics Magic. So we've got Kuja Genome Sorcerer here as our commander, and this one here is going to be pretty clearly going to be Wizard Tribal. At the beginning of your end step, you're going to create that tapped wizard, and then if you control 4 or more wizards, you're going to get to transform Kuja. And then on the other side, Kuja has, if a wizard you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals double that damage instead. That is an insanely good ability. So we're going to be casting non-creature spells, obviously, here, primarily, and focusing around kind of wizards. So artifacts, we've got a few more soul, like a few more mana rocks here. We've got like Mind Stone, Arcane Signet, Rakdos Signet, Thought Vessel, Soul Ring, you know, a few mana rocks. Because they are non-creature spells, I don't mind having more of them, because now, you know, even our wizards that have that ping for 1 are still going to trigger off these, which is great. The Fire Crystal gives us haste. Really great. We've got the Helm of the Host here. Now, if you don't know, back in March of Machine, they changed it so that tokens of creatures that have, you know, that can flip over, or tokens of anything that can flip over, have the ability still to flip once they become like as a token. So realistically, if we attach Helm of the Host onto Kuja, right, we create a token copy of Kuja, and then at the end step, it flips. We do that again. We have 3 Kujas out. Now all those Kujas are doubling the damage that people are taking, and all of a sudden people are taking triple damage. Sorry, not triple, quadruple damage from every one of our pings, which is really good. Our creatures here are primarily just going to be built around dealing damage with like the Rock Slide Sorcerer, the Basalt Ravager. We do have some of the other kind of more generic damages with like, you know, Firebrand Archer, Gutter Snipe, that kind of thing. We've got the Bloodline Necromancer to allow us to reanimate a wizard here, which is good. Torwaiki, the younger here, is going to make it so that each time we deal that non-combat damage, which is whatever our wizards are doing, it's going to deal 1 extra from that. Black Waltz is great because it's going to deal 2 additional damage to each opponent instead of just the normal 1. Queen Bran pumps out more of those wizards. We've got Mysidian Elder here pumping out more of the wizards. And Aethermancer dealing a huge amount of damage to someone. If we bring this in, right, if we bring this in, we've got Kuja flipped. Someone's got, say, 5 non-basic lands. Boom, we're dealing 10 damage to them. But 5 is not even, like, that's the low point. Some decks are going to run, like, you know, 10 non-basic lands. Boom, just a huge one-shot to someone. Coruscation Mage is a wizard, which is great. Thrasher, Party Thrasher is a wizard, which is great, but also allows us to do that kind of impulse draw, which is really, really good. Stormkill Artist is not, but he allows so many different combos that he has to be in here. And then, you know, just a whole bunch of wizards. We do have the Sedgemoor Witch in here, which I'll talk about in a little bit, because this deck is easily a 3, potentially even low 4, because of a huge combo between a few different things in here. We've also got the Harmonic Prodigy to double our wizard triggers, and then Kefka Dancing Mad just to kind of add additional stuff, because he makes it so that they lose life. It's not damage from him, so it doesn't get doubled, but still, if it gets doubled, like his trigger by the Harmonic Prodigy, boom, great. Enchantments, just, you know, normal Spellslinger stuff, plus Underworld Breach, so that way we have access to all our instants and sorceries later on in the game to bring them back. Our instants are just going to be a whole bunch of different kind of small, like, you know, card draw and stuff, like, you know, big score, boom. We've got Deadly Dispute. We can sacrifice an artifact or a creature. We've got treasures that we can sacrifice, which is great. You know, just small, very small mana wise instance, so that way we can get a whole bunch of damage out very, very quickly. We also have In's Mischief here to redirect something that's going to hit our commander, like, you know, a path to exile. Boom, now you're exiling your own thing. Have fun with that. Goodbye, I love you. Yeah, goodbye. We've got Reiterate here, goes infinite with the mana geyser, which is huge. You know, a great thing to have. Even without that though, we can still use it to copy one of these instants to just get some great triggers. Skipping past the lands here, we've got the Planeswalker here, Professor Onyx, dealing damage to life loss, dealing life loss to each opponent each time we cast or copy an instance or sorcery. Huge. And then into our actual sorceries here, you'll notice a few that are great down the bottom here. Chain of Smog. This is the infinite that I was talking about. Chain of Smog plus either Professor Onyx is infinite life loss for life gain for opponents, because and then the other one that it goes infinite with is the Sedgemoor Witch, because of the fact that this is just cast or copy, create this. So as long as you don't care about what is in your hand, right? Chain of Smog, you cast it, and then you choose someone else to copy it. and they don't have to pay to copy it. You can just continuously choose yourself infinitely times, right? Which means that with certain cards in here, anything that has the Magecraft, so Professor Onyx goes infinite with it. We've got the... Where was he? We've got the Stormkiln Artist, again, goes infinite with it, as well as the Sedgemoor Witch. All of them go infinite with it, which is huge, which is probably why Magecraft is not around anymore as much, because of the fact that it just goes infinite so easily. Then the Mana Geyser, alongside the Reiterate here, goes infinite as well, because you can just buy it back constantly very, very easily. So... that is basically the Genomic Magic one there. So Rakdos Wizards with a huge amount of burn and stuff. And then our final one here is Take Me to Nikoi Town. If you don't know, this is after the... who was it? The director of Final Fantasy 14, I believe it was. He basically put himself into the game here as this wandering minstrel. So that's what this one is named after. So this is a 5-color deck. You heard me right. This is a 5-color deck. It is slightly above the more, like, you know, on the budget. The other ones were sitting more around that kind of 80 mark, which is what the actual MSRP was. But this one here is at 140. You're still looking at, like, you know, potentially above that. Once you buy one of these decks and then upgrade it, you're still looking at above that. So, you know, this one still ends up potentially more worthwhile than those ones. So the Wandering Minstrel here is going to be a 5-color landfall based deck. And you're probably looking at me like, hey, you just did a landfall deck with the Chocos Flock. This one is landfall, but it is more focused around birds and, you know, not so much around the lands, just a whole bunch of birds and bird focus there with land to kind of ramp you up a bit. This one here is built around the actual lands instead. So we've got a whole bunch of ramp with the Regalia here, getting you a land off the top when you crew it. We've got the Expedition map here. I'm going to reset this so that way it's sorted by mana value instead. Into our actual creatures here, most of our creatures are just going to be ramp or stuff that benefits from ramp. Elvish Reclaimer is great, and you'll notice that there's going to be a sub-theme here of basically getting your lands into your graveyard or sacrificing your lands and then just bringing them back in a huge kind of one big finisher. So stuff like Sylvan Safekeeper can sacrifice your lands to give things Shroud. That's great. We've got, on the other hand, we've got Aftermath Analyst, which can bring all your lands back from the graveyard. Rite of the Reliquary is great here because you can sacrifice your creature to search for a land. Any creature, which works really great when we've got stuff like the Scoot Swarm. Oh, you got a 1/1 out. Boom, we're going to sacrifice that. We're going to bring something else in instead. Risen Reef as well works really great here because Risen Reef is going to, whenever an elemental enters, look at the top card. If it's a land, put it onto the battlefield. And meanwhile, the Wandering Minstrel here is at the beginning of combat on your turn. If you control 5 or more lands, create a 2/2 elemental creature token. That's all colors. So you're going to just be able to, you know, create that. We're going to bring it in. Then we're going to have a whole bunch of landfall triggers up here. We're going to be able to, you know, pump everything up because we're going to have a huge amount of mana here. I should have actually said what Wandering Minstrel does. It makes all your lands enter untapped. We talked about Spelunking, how great that was. Well, why don't we just have that in the command zone? Create that elemental, and then down here, other creatures you control get +X until end of turn, where X is the number of towns you control. You just need to pay 8 for that. But given we're in a landfall deck, we're going to have a huge amount of lands anyway. Omo's great here because it's going to turn all of our lands into towns. They're mostly all towns anyway, but why don't we just make them towns as well? We can also make stuff into elementals if we want it, because there's a little bit of elemental stuff in here. Not a huge amount though. Traveling Chocobos in here again. Let's play lands from the top. We've got the Necro Bloom because, you know, why not? Yeah. Why not have Necro Bloom if we're going to be having a whole bunch of lands with different names anyway? Let's just create some zombies as well. AC's here for card draw. Ancient Greenwater, double all our landfall triggers. Omnath for the elemental synergy there. Our actual enchantments here are mostly just built around, you know, the landfall stuff as well. Instance removal plus ramp, basically. Mostly removal and ramp, and then a little protection here. Lands are just all towns. Mostly towns, sorry. There is some basic lands in here just in case. Plains Walker here, we've got red and 7 to make it so that whenever we we can put lands onto our battlefield tapped, create some big tree folk, or just return everything from our graveyard to our hand, which is huge. And then sorceries, again, is just ramp stuff because that's what we want to do. Disorienting choice is probably my favorite here. This is really great. You basically choose an artifact or enchantment from each player. They can either exile it or you get to search your library for lands. So, if they don't exile it because they really want to keep it, then boom, you're just going to get to ramp. Tempted Discovery is great as well because now everyone's ramping, but you get to ramp any card, not necessarily, basic lands like it usually is. You can just search up some of your best of your, towns or whatever. There's not a huge amount of really good towns. Most of the towns are just tapped and to add 2 colors, but there is some that aren't too bad here, especially because you can use these for synergies for other things. There's a few different things. There is a infinite in this deck as well from memory. I think I added in, I think there's one infinite in here combo. Oop, there. The infinite combo is the Shifting Woodlands, the Aftermath Analyst, the Tireless Provisioner, and then Sylvan Safekeeper. So you sacrifice any land except for Shifting Woodland. Sacrifice them all until you've just got the Shifting Woodland. You use its ability to copy the Aftermath Analyst. Then you sacrifice it, bring all your lands back, including it will create a whole bunch of treasures. Then you can copy all of those, use all those treasures to, copy it all. So I'm explaining that really poorly because I have not had my meds this evening, but you can see it there. So we do have infinite combo here with its infinite LTB, infinite colored mana, infinite sacrifice triggers, infinite death triggers, life gain triggers, life gain. We have a huge amount of really, really great stuff here just from this combo here. So this one here, I'd probably, it says bracket 2 here. I would probably put it at a bracket 3. In fact, I think all of these are probably going to be around bracket 3s personally. But yeah, I'd love to hear from you guys as to what you think. I think that personally, that if I was looking at building a Final Fantasy deck, this is pretty Final Fantasy. We've got a whole bunch of Final Fantasy stuff in here. It's mixed in with other stuff. This would be essentially if a Final Fantasy deck was made and they didn't mind putting in stuff that was not Final Fantasy in it. You could build, these decks essentially. So I'd love to hear from you guys. Have a great day and goodbye.